So Tantric Buddhism or Tantra or Esoteric Buddhism, esoteric means for a small group, a private group of practitioners, as opposed to exoteric, which is for the public. So that's why sometimes it's commonly referred to as secretive kind of practice. And we will understand why that is the case. Some people may understand, say, it's almost like a cult, where only a small group of people that practice this kind of Buddhism, and that is transmitted or taught within a small group from group to group. And there's reason for why that is the case. And so we will dive into that to understand why is there a necessity for Tantric Buddhism. Because we know that in Buddhism, we have Zen, we have Pure Land Buddhism, right? We have Avatamsaka Buddhism, and that so many schools. You have, overall, you have your Mahayana, you have Theravada, and so there is so many schools already. So why is there a need for esoteric Buddhism? And we'll try to understand that. Last time we talked about, in Buddhism, just for a brief review, you take Buddhism after the Buddha entered Nirvana. Buddhism was then divided into two main schools. You have Mahayana and Theravada. Mahayana, Maha means great. Yana, Y-A-N-A, means the way. So it's a great way or great vehicle. And then you have another comparison to Mahayana, the great way, the small way, is called Hinayana, Hinayana. So Hina meaning small, Yana is the way, right? And so after that, you have Buddhism really divided into two main schools or study. One is on focusing on wisdom. The other one is focusing on meditation. And I'm highlighting here, Mayamaka was one of the older schools focusing on wisdom. And the expression of that wisdom is devotion. And that's why there is a devotional Buddhism is more on, for example, like believing, more on faith. So wisdom is their focus on achieving enlightenment through wisdom. So there's two ends of the spectrum, if you will. And tantric or magical Buddhism, as it's called here, esoteric, is closely connected to Yogacara, because they use mantras to focus the mind and to achieve enlightenment. That's how that's their approach. Yogacara never repudiated the absolutism of Mayamikas, which is wisdom. They, in fact, the great teachers, such as Vasubandhu and Nagarjuna, those are great teachers who encouraged the worshipping of Amitabha and Maitreya Bodhisattva. So that's the devotional aspect of Buddhism. So being directly connected to Yogacara, esoteric Buddhism is in a way indirectly connected to Mayamaka and the devotional schools. We often see these devotional schools in Japan, like Pure Land is one of those devotional schools. Again, devotion is an expression of wisdom, right? Dr. Edward Kahns, he said that Tantra combines devotional with meditations and of the yoga schools and the metaphysics or the spirituality of Mayamakas. So in other words, combining both wisdoms and meditation. Tantra, and he said that it is indeed, even though that may be the case according to Dr. Kahn's explanation, but we shouldn't conclude that that Tantric Buddhism was a result of movement of popular syncretism, meaning a combination of different teachings and to generate something. You take a little bit here, a little bit there, and now you have something new. That's not how we should interpret Tantric Buddhism. Sometimes teachings, there are teachings that are combined with the cultural influences to morph into something different. And we have seen this in different countries, right? They take something and then they change it and they make it a cultural religion out of it. And sometimes that's the case. But here, what Shankarasita, the author of this book, is saying that it may not be the case with Tantric Buddhism just because there is correlation between Yogacara and Madhyamika doesn't mean of those two. But Shankarasita is trying to make the cases that it could have come from directly from the Buddha's original teaching. Right? And so this is probably the most difficult aspect of studying Tantric Buddhism, because you will see later that it is not straightforward in learning Tantric Buddhism in particular, because when you read a Tantric book, you don't know, without a qualified spiritual teacher, you don't know whether what you're reading is spiritual or historical, literal or symbolic. You can say this is the most difficult aspect of learning Tantric Buddhism. And if you don't understand the connotation behind it, you could be misled, and therefore you would encounter dangers in implementing the practices. And we'll see that in a little bit. So it's critical to be studying under a qualified teacher. That's why in Tantric Buddhism, they put a lot of emphasis on studying under directions of spiritual teacher, right? 上师, 等师. They, in fact, to them, studying under a qualified spiritual teacher is even more important than studying with the Buddha. Because if you don't have that affinity with the Buddha, you might not accept it, right? During the Buddha's time, the Buddha, even though he was regarded as a great teacher, but not everybody was able to accept his teachings. In fact, there were people that the Buddha couldn't help, but yet his disciples were able to go into the town and help the whole town. So this the affinity. If you have no affinity, no respect for whomever, it's very difficult to accept their teachings, right? And so to them, Tantric Buddhism, to them, it is more important to find to have that affinity with a qualified teacher. And that's why they put so much emphasis on qualified spiritual teachers. Tantra, what does it mean? Tantra represents the faculty of vigor, right? Energy, putting a lot of energy, focus, and maintenance and production of wholesome, and elimination and obstruction of unwholesome. So growing your wholesomeness, your skillfulness, and eliminating the unskillfulness, the unwholesomeness. And by wholesome states of mind, what is meant here is jhana, or meditation. And consequently, the dominating interest of Tantra is not theoretical, but practical. This is very important to understand. Without appreciating this statement here, we will not be able to accept the teachings in Tantric Buddhism. Again, Tantric Buddhism is not about developing new ideas, new ways of interpreting the Buddha's teachings, or even new theories of Buddhism, but it is a basis for practice. And that's why they emphasize so much on the Dharma instrument, right? They use bells, they use different types of tools to help them to with their practice. And so their focus, again, is on practicality of Buddhism and not just the theories of Buddhism. So this is something that we need to appreciate in order to understand Tantric Buddhism. So, and this point here is emphasized multiple times throughout his book in this section, just to make sure that we appreciate this point before moving forward. Otherwise, it makes no sense when you read and you study Tantric Buddhism. It makes no sense without appreciating this statement. And he mentions here that in default, there seems to be a gravitational pull of literal thinking, meaning that the essence of the original teaching degrades over time. And nothing can escape this kind of literal thinking, the gravitational pull of literal thinking. meaning that we don't understand deep behind the theory of it. Maka doctrine, their original emphasis was on wisdom, but then it has sunk into scholasticism. It's just study, right? It's not about developing wisdom, but just study to get your degree, study to accomplish certain things to be recognized. So it's no longer about uncovering our own wisdom, but it's about scholasticism, right? And then the Yoga Kara, that school, the same thing. Originally, they focus on meditation, but then it has become theoretical, and it has become speculative interpretation of existence in the light of this experience. So this is the danger of moving too far away from the Buddha's original teaching in terms of time and space. We have been apart from the Buddha, at least 2,500 years, right? That's a long time. and in terms of space is the interpretations, because of the way that people live nowadays. You can't take old ways of explaining things thousands of years ago to explain to people of today. They won't accept it. I just learned something about the new generation, and for example, there was an incident, and then I share with them the lessons learned of how to avoid mistakes, and it was about reporting to the police. Say, you should fill out this form or that, and otherwise they're not going to work on the case. And the person who shared with me say, we are not interested in lessons learned. We just want justice. They want things to happen right away. They want immediate gratification. So you can't take elaborative ways of explaining things, trying to share with the younger folks, because they are not interested in a very elaborative, long explanation. They only want the results. They want justice right away. So in other words, we have to accommodate the audience, right? Those who want to study with us. But by doing that, we are falling into the danger of misinterpreting the original teaching, because we're moving too far away from its original intent. And that is probably one of the most difficulties in studying Tantric Buddhism. It's that without proper guidance, we don't know what we're learning. Is it symbolic? Is it historical? Is it literal? And so, but over time, without the proper understanding, the teachings become superstitions. Right? This is the natural gravitational pull of the ego. It's just natural degradation of how things is. For example, in Europe, right, there are beautiful churches, and then in front of them there are ponds, right? And people, you see that tourists, especially tourists, they go there and they throw coins into the pond, and you ask them, why you do that? So I don't know. So good luck, right? So the meaning of the water in front of the church and throwing coins into the pond has lost. And so to them now, it's just about luck. And the same thing with Buddhism. Why do you study Buddhism? Why do you practice Buddhism? Why do you prostrate in front of a Buddha statue? Why do you attend Dhamma assembly and chant and all that? And of course, the normal Buddhist would say it's for good luck. It's that time of the year, New Year. I have to go because my tradition says that I should go. If I don't go, I'll have bad luck the whole year, right? So in order to avoid bad luck, I have to go to maintain my luck. Or some people who study Buddhism, and the way that's mistranslated, especially in studying jhana or meditation, is to balance and maintain the physical and spiritual energies, right? It's about maintaining our egoistic existence. And so if we digress too much from the original teachings of Buddhism, of the Buddha, then it turns into an egoistic motivation, right? It's not about maintaining our luck, right? About building our luck, about balancing out physical, mental energies in order to maintain our survival, right? Why you throw coins into the pond of water? Well, it's for good luck. Why do you need luck? Well, because I want to live forever. I want to have lots of money. And so that's the degradation over time. That's the danger that we should avoid when we encounter new ways of explaining Buddhism. I'm not saying that new ways of explaining Buddhism is something bad, anything bad about it. It's just that we have to be careful when we do that. Because without the proper understanding of Buddhism, especially the original intent of Buddhist teaching, is that it becomes just egoistic motivation, right? To basically to enhance our survival. And so this is why I'm hesitant to use my own interpretations, and I'm using that's why I'm sharing with you. This kind of talk might not look so sexy because I'm not here in front of an audience trying to motivate people like those motivational speakers, but I'm using my notes. I'm sharing my notes in front of you, so it's not very sexy. But yet, I want to avoid making errors. That's why I'm showing you the sources of what I shared information that I'm sharing with you, so that this is for your consideration. It is not something that I'm egoistically trying to impose on anybody, right? So although it may look very, may be boring, but at least I think this is a more reliable and accurate way of communicating the Buddha's intent, especially from teachers, well-learned teachers that I have benefit from learning from them, and I put into practice and I realize the benefits. And so in a way I can trust that this author has done good work, and not only from reading his work, but also from practicing, putting what I've learned into practice, and I realize, it's the same, it's achieving the same results, so it shouldn't be so far off, all right? We have to be careful when we pick up a Buddhist book and try to accept it like this. We should question, what is the intent of this author? And is it leading us to a biased view, a more protective view, egoistic, right? Then we should understand the original Buddha's teaching. And what is the original teachings anyway? What is the original teachings? How do we know what we're learning is too far off from the original teaching? Well, one way is to base it on the law of conditionality. The law of conditionality, if anything that moves off tangent from the law of conditionality, we know that it has moved off away from the original meaning of the Buddha. For example, like karma. Everybody knows karma. Everybody thinks they know karma. Karma did not come from Buddhism. Karma was a concept that came from Hinduism, right? So it did not originate from Buddhism. But people often misunderstand karma as something that does not jive with Buddhist meaning, Buddha's original meaning. For example, like people, when they say karma, they've done something wrong, or they encounter something that unsatisfactory, to say, this is my karma, right? That's the normal expression, that this is my karma. Meaning I'm destined to encounter it. So that's the wrong way of understanding karma, because by understanding it that way, we're saying that our past karma means action, our past actions in a way predetermined our current existence. Or another way of misunderstanding it is that there is some super being that predetermines our existence. So karma can either be our own doing or somebody else doing to us. And that's a wrong way of understanding karma according to Buddhism. How Buddha sees karma, it does not ignore karma. It accepts karma, but it reinterprets karma. The Buddha reinterpreted the concept of karma. And the karma here is that there is a causal relationship, but it does not predetermine your current existence, right? What you have done in the past can only influence your current state of being. It does not determine your current state of being. So when you say, this is my karma, then that means you are accepting what you have done. You are boxing yourself. You are eliminating, you are denying yourself from growth, from change. Because how you were yesterday is how you are today. What's the point? And then that's how you're going to be tomorrow. What's the point in trying? What's the point in putting the effort? Right? So we're boxing ourselves when we are denying ourselves of change and opportunities. What Buddha said was that a person who encounters certain things because of three factors. One is because of his past doing that has karmic momentum. At the same time, it is the environment. And the third factor is that his current karma. So those three factors come into play to define your current existence, your current state of being. So it's not just karma in the past, but your own doing, your environment. For example, if you want to climb a mountain and your legs are weak, you can just say, this is my karma, I cannot climb the mountain, right? It's my karma. And then that will deny you the success. But you can say, yes, I recognize my limited physical abilities, but yet I can use tools. I can either jump on a gondola to go up to the mountain, or I can use a cane to help me to hike up the mountain, right? So you don't have to accept that. You don't have to accept your past to define who you are, but you can use your environment, like a gondola. You jump into a gondola, it takes you up to the top. And you can use your own motivation. I can do this. I know I can do this. I've seen people who have done this, right? And I've read about it. So if they can do it, I can do it. So that kind of thinking allows you to change. And so when we say conditionality, is that all those things play into your current situations. Conditions from the past, conditions from the environment, conditions from your current thinking will define who you are. If you think you can be successful, you are right. If you think you are not going to be successful, then you are right too. We should understand conditionality. So again, what I'm trying to say is, whatever we learned, we should bounce it off from conditionality. If the teaching teaches us to become more egoistic, to become more pessimistic, to become attached to certain things, joy, whatever, in order to preserve so that we can continue to enhance our survival, continue to live forever, or anything that promises you to live forever, then that's not Buddhism, because Buddhism does not say things will last forever. Doesn't mean that things don't exist. It's just that things exist based on conditions, right? So when we want something, we have to put in the efforts to achieve it. It's not to pray to the Buddha for our success, but to put in the efforts along with the help of the Buddha to be successful, right? So that's the whole point here, is that things degrade over time because of the gravitational pull of the egoistic motivation. In other words, it's our own doing that degrades the original intent, right? So Tantra here is esoteric Buddhism, being not concerned with the theoretical elaborations of the doctrines, but the applications of the methods leading to the realizations of realities. So not so much to the domain of doctrines as to the domain of methods. So again, Tantric Buddhism focuses more on practice, not doctrine, and not a starting point for fresh speculative thought, but a basis for action. Also, Tantric Buddhism is also known as Tibetan Buddhism, and we will see why that is the case. There's some historical reason why it is now known as Tibetan Buddhism. Tantra represents the practical side of Buddhism. Right? Again, Tantra stands for action, but not just any general action, but it is the spiritual, ritual, sacramental action. Right? So it's not just any general, but it's really spiritual action that's focusing on. So action is of three kinds, right? Physical, vocal, and mental. So thought or mental action determines speech and action, right? How we think impacts what we say and what we do. And the same thing that what we do, what we say impacts our thought. Let's say if you want to motivate yourself, you can say something positive, and then you have that in vigor. You have that motivation, that enthusiasm to continue. Sacramental action is about transformation of our consciousness by means of spiritually significant sounds and symbols and movements. So this is why we start to understand why they use tools. They use chanting. It is because when you chant, your mind follows what you do. And so you want to direct your mind. You don't have to sit down and force yourself, close your eyes and force yourself to not think, but just use your speech, use your actions to guide your mind, right? So if you sit down and you force your mind to control your wandering false thoughts, then you are putting a lot of energy in your head. You're sending a lot of energy, and you can have headache, and that can result in physical illness. Right? You don't want to send too much energy up in your head. You can degrade your brain that way. You can physically deteriorate your brain by sending too much energy. But a more suitable way is to guide your mind with your actions, with your speech, right? Say good things, do good deeds in order to guide the mind. By spiritually significant sounds, it is meant dharanis or mantras. Dharanis are you can say summaries of certain concept, and they compact it into a few words like Amni Batmi Hama, those or those sounds in order to remind. So it's very symbolic in order to remind ourselves what it means. Just like when you drive down the street and you see a red light, what does it mean? To stop, right? You don't speed up. And then when you see a green light, then you should go. If you stop, then somebody will hit you in the back. But if you see yellow light, what do? What do you do when you see yellow light? Well, actually, you should speed up to avoid a red light, right? No, you should. It depends. Sometimes you do need to speed up. Sometimes you need to slow down, but depends on your speed at the moment. Again, don't break any traffic laws. But again, what I'm trying to say is sometimes you use those symbols they're more meaningful, right? That's why it says a picture is worth 1,000 words, because there's so much behind it. So when you have significant sounds, it illustrates better, or you understand it more. And it has tremendous effect from the constant repetitions of the mantra. It has a tremendous effect on the mind. And in Tantric Buddhism, it is extremely important to use mantra as a tool. And Sankarasita, he said in his book, Know Your Mind, he says that when we perform something, our karma, certain karmas, here karmas mean action, right? Whatever you do, that's karma. Well, whatever you say, what you think, that's karma. Karma is just action. Action of three types, right? Mental, verbal, and physical, right? And it says that whenever you perform a karma, it tends to enhance one's tendency to perform them, meaning you're forming a habit. When you continue to do something, it becomes a habit, just like smoking. At the beginning, like in high school, students, right? They try smoking. They didn't like it, but because they want to be cool, so they continued to try. They may have cough at first, but then they continue to try and then became a habit. And once it becomes a habit, it becomes very powerful, karmically powerful, once you have make it into a habit. And so that's why in Tibetan Buddhism, they spend hours or days even, like trying to paint those very beautiful pictures with sands, right? Different color sand. And then after that, they destroy. But they keep doing, or they would prostrate like 100,000 times or chant the mantras 100,000 times. And the reason for that is to create karmic momentum, to change the mind, to direct the mind through your physical and your verbal actions, right? Does it make sense? Right. And so the importance, that's why the importance of going to go on a retreat, like a meditation retreat, for example, right? Because in that, you only perform positive actions over and over again, over that week, or that weekend. Right? You do nothing but just very positive actions, right? No anger, right? You can't get there's nothing to be angry about. Very meditative, very positive environment, and it shapes you. And that's why some people like to go to meditation retreat. It is because it feels invigorating, feels very positive, and they like that. And then after and when they return to work, they go back to the original sense, and they get aggravated at work. They get frustrated at work. And you can see how such environment can impact your mind. So we want to be surrounded by positivity in order to change our mind to become more positive, to become more pleasant. And also by reducing the opportunities for unskillful mental action, you can create positivity that way as well. So habit is what? Is karmic momentum. That's all it is, right? Once you have habit, it's very difficult to break. It's good and bad to that too, because once you get into the habit, especially skillful, there's nothing that can stand your way. You will achieve your goal. So there are people who are so determined, right, to achieve their goals that nothing can distract them. And that's why they put their heart and soul into it, is because they have gained karmic momentum. And so if you want to be successful and you don't want to give up, just continue to reinforce that idea and just do it. Don't you wake up and you say, oh, I don't want to go to class today, or I don't want to go to work. Well, just jump out of bed and just do it. But if you keep thinking, you say, oh, I don't want to do it, I don't want to do it, you're reinforcing, right? Your verbal, your thoughts are reinforcing your motivation or dismotivation. Therefore, so knowing this, we know how the mind works. You want to control the mind, use your actions, use your verbal to control the mind, right? To motivate the mind. And he says here that it becomes weighty positive karma of jhana or meditation. When you practice meditation, and I'm not just talking about sitting there meditation and enjoying the bliss. No, but you have to change your consciousness. When you change your consciousness, you're raising it to a different level. It becomes weighty karma, meaning that it has a lot of momentum behind it. And he says that it will have a decisive effect when it comes to one's rebirth. In other words, you want to have a good rebirth in the next life and not the lower evil realms, like in other words, the heavens or the human realms to enjoy bliss, fortune and so forth, then you should have that positivity of a momentum in order to carry you on. An example that the Buddha used was a tree growing, right, towards the west direction. And then when you cut it, which direction is going to fall? Towards that direction that's leaning, right? So it's the same thing that if we live our lives in a meaningful way, we're positive, we're helpful. And so when it comes for us to move on to the next life, it is very likely it's going to lead us to a positive, blissful state of being, all right? So so we just talk about spiritual sounds, mantras, right? Reciting mantras, dharanis. spiritually significant movements, such as are made by a part of the body, like mudras. Mudras are like spiritual hand gestures, or the whole body, like the prostrations, right? The act of obeisance. Here's some examples, like giant mudra. And I'm not an expert in this, so I have to look up what these all mean. Giant is a Sanskrit for knowledge, a wisdom. This gesture is sometimes referred to as mudra of knowledge. I include it here just for completeness. Prana is used to activate dormant energy within the subtle body, and increases vitality, and it helps to clear up energetic blockages. Privi here means vast one, great or big, or Varund. Varund is the balancing energy to help understand the body more. And Sura here, I know Sura here means to keep the sun, meaning to increase the fire element. So you can look this up and learn on your own if you like, but this is just for completeness. But we should be careful again when we study mantra or tantric Buddhism, is because if we're not careful and we must understand the teachings, then it will make us more egoistic, and only to study with the purpose of enhancing our own survival, right? So in Tantra, they put a lot of focus on the body, the physical body, and they glorify the body as a vehicle that could take you to enlightenment. And so and not only the body, but material objects, the universe as well. And that's why we see illustrations of the universe and different tools that they use, and the clothing, the outfits. It's all part of them. They are really tools for them to achieve their means, or enlightenment. And Tantra regards the world too, not as hindrance, but as a help to enlightenment, utilizing it as the theater of salvation and the revelations of the absolute. And this is why we should praise Tantric Buddhism. Tantric Buddhism does not escape from the world. They are in the world, and they're making it better. In other words, they are not running away to find purity. They find purity within impurity. And this is something that we should praise Tantric Buddhism, that they are not running away, but they are dealing with very difficult problems to find answers, right? They're not praying, they're not running away, but within the problems, they work hard to find solution. And that is definitely something noteworthy that we should praise Tantric Buddhism. So instead of giving up the world, one should live in it, right? In such a way that the worldly life itself is transmuted into the life of transcendental, right? Instead of running away from the world, we use the world as a tool to transcend the calamity, to transcend the problem, to find solutions. So in Tantric Buddhism, living in the midst of impurity, they are unafraid of impurity, but they challenge impurities, the challenges, difficulties head on to find solution. Just like a lotus, right? The lotus is beautiful, it's fragrant, but it grows from what? Mud, right? Dirty mud. But it transcends the mud, transcends the dirtiness to achieve purity. The leaves, you may, not sure you notice, but the leaves attract no dust, right? It is dust free, and you put water into it, it repels water because it's uncontaminated by the impurity in its environment. And that's how we should live our lives, is that we don't run away from problems, but when we see an opportunity to improve ourselves, we should accept the challenge. to improve ourselves and not run away from difficulties. And that kind of life is meaningful, right? It's to overcome challenges, to prove to ourselves that we can do it. Just like other people, we can do it as well. We can be successful as well. So acting upon the mind, not only by moving the limbs, but by manipulating the breath and the seminal fluid. so they use this body a lot to control the breathing. If you notice one thing, when you control the breathing, all the vital signs, elements will line up. That's like when you're anxious, when you have worries and you're agitated, if you can just focus on your breathing, breathe, then you will calm down, right? So that breathing is it's a very powerful way of controlling your vitality. And again, Tantric Buddhism is not concerned so much with philosophical generalizations, but the minutest details of spiritual practice, which were too complex, difficult, and subtle to be committed in writing. And that is why there is a necessity of receiving initiation and guidance from a qualified spiritual master. And that's why you don't see this tantric from the original teachings. I mean, original writing, I should say. But Tantric Buddhism, the Tantric text, came about 1,000 years after the Buddha had entered Nirvana. So 1,000 years later, and we will see why that is the case. We have seen that in the Avatamsaka Sutra, right, one of the major sutra that we talked about, which is occupying an immediate position between Yamaka and Yogacara, right? This is wisdom, this is meditation. Avatamsaka Sutra is intermediate position between the two ends of the spectrum, if you will. Wisdom and meditation. Avatamsaka Sutra is in the middle. And more properly, might it be regarded as supplying the connecting links between Yogacara and Tantra. And so that's the connection, Tantra and Yogacara, direct connection because of meditation, the meditative aspect of chanting mantra. Mayamaka declared that all things were in reality sunyata, meaning voidness, empty. We should understand that empty here does not mean it doesn't exist, but it's the emptiness here means the possibility of change. For example, this computer here, we call it empty because there's nothing, that single component that is called the computer. Right? This computer is made up of the screen, the keyboard, and computer chips, and everything, all the components inside. You can't just pick one element in this device and say it's a computer. Even that element is still made of different substance, right? Different parts of nature. And so you cannot, that's why it says empty, because you cannot find something that's permanently exists and that is called a computer or anything. That's why it's empty from that sense. Not that it doesn't exist, but it's conditionally exists. Does it make sense? So that's emptiness. Whereas Yogacara identifies sunyata with absolute mind. They're saying this sunyata, this beautiful possibility of change, is the absolute mind, the reality. And it's not incorrect to see that change, the possibility of change is beautiful, right? Whereas Mayamaka is saying it's nothing, it's just change. But Yogacara is saying it is beautiful, it's absolute, right? Does it make sense? Right? Does it make sense? Okay. Avayamsaka is taking the middle position, saying it's non-duality of things. It's just a reflection of each other. It's like jewels reflecting upon itself, like a pearl or a jewel that shines and reflects. But in other words, there is no obstruction. There's only influence. You influence me just as I influence you, right? You're sitting there, you are changing my thoughts because I'm I have to modify and change my speech according to your behavior. And by receiving my words, you are being changed as well. You are contemplating, you're thinking, does this guy make sense? Is this guy out of his mind? Or, oh, that seems to make sense. Now I have a new way of dealing with the situations I have, right? So, and then when you think something, you twitch your eyes or your nose, and then I respond to that as well. And so you influence me as much as I influence you. And so that's what Amita Saka, that's the true essence of it. So being concerned not with the theory, but with practice, Tantra is quite indifferent about metaphysical sides of the doctrines of interpretation. If transcendental realities were reflected in objects, Tantra wanted to know exactly where to find them. That's why it's using a lot of physical stuff to represent spirituality. And so let me bypass this. Using a lot of symbolism, like a blue Buddha, like colors to represent. Like this Buddha here is called. He's blue, and he represents consciousness. Adi Buddha. So you can see I'm just including here for your view that Tantric Buddhism is beautiful. It's very symbolic. It's very colorful. Tantra here is using deities and to represent different aspects of realities. That's why they have green Buddhas, blue Buddhas, to represent the different aspects of reality or different stages of transcendental path with a particular mantra or mudra, which is hand gestures. The elements, directions, animal color, and centrals are all part of the body. So they're using the universe as well as the physical body as a means to help them to realize enlightenment. By repeating the mantra, by repeating the mantra and manipulation of the various phenomena, one can not only place oneself in correspondence or alignment with a particular order of reality, but which he personifies, but also be infused with its transcendental power, meaning that when you chant a certain mantra, you are resonating with that particular power, because each deity represents a particular power, and when you chant a certain mantra, you are resonating with that particular power, like loving kindness, or and so forth and so forth. Tantric puja is called Dharma assemblies. They come together, they worship and so forth. It's called pujas, a ritual worship. It's not just a mere outpouring of devotion, but it's a scientific method of producing internal by means of external changes, acting through the body and the mind. So like puja is a Dharma assembly. They come, they pray, they worship, they chant mantra. Is that they are resonating, they're invoking the power from the universe, if you will, or from the deities or the Buddhas or Bodhisattvas. In other words, they're using the mantras to guide the mind. Okay? And when you are tuned in, you are absorbed in the mantra recitation, and then you are really absorbing in jhana, your meditation. And this form is perceived even more vividly than the objects of the senses, and appears not less real than they are, but more real. So when they start to see images, they start to smell fragrance. To them it's very real because they are absorbed in meditation, and they can sense those realities. So the purpose of visualization is that through our own personal experience, the fundamental tenet of the Yogacara school, that all objects of perceptions, including our own body, are only transformation of the consciousness. So according to Yogacara, what you experience is not, it's only your own perception. For example, when we see somebody, is that person good or bad? Is that person beautiful or not? You cannot say that person is absolutely beautiful. It's only your perception, right? So beauty is only in the eyes of the beholder, right? That's what they say. Because you like somebody, you fall in love with somebody, it doesn't mean that other people see the same beauty, right? So he meditates, the practitioner meditates upon the voidness of the transcendental form, identify himself with the form, and upon the voidness of his own individuality as well. So when we study, when they study meditation, they're focused on emptiness or sunyata, voidness. And that is to say that there is voidness in their own visualization. They understand that things are impermanent. Nothing can last forever. Things exist because of conditions. So that allows them to not become attached, but to transcend the world. Does it make sense? When you are not attached, you can move forward. If you are attached, then you are stuck. So in order to reach the transcendental path, you have to be able to detach from your egoistic attachment. And that allows you to develop insight. So insight or wisdom is not something that is mysterious. Nothing is that's magical, but it's your understanding that things exist because of conditions. And that may seem very simple, but how is that insight? For example, one way of misunderstanding that is that if you don't understand that properly, you become enslaved to your own view. You become prejudiced. You become biased. All right, and become protective and egoistic. And by that, you create egoistic, unskillful deeds. And that will lead to suffering. And so when we study, it may seem like, oh, yeah, things exist based on condition. What's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that at the end, if we don't understand that, it leads to suffering. And isn't that what we all want? Is that people in this world, right? We all want to achieve happiness and to avoid suffering. But because step by step, well, we're not careful, we are on that projection. And if that projection is towards suffering, and then we continue that path, then we're going to enter the realm of suffering. And so even though it may seem very simple on the surface, but it is very deep, because everything that we encounter, we want it to last when it's joyful. And if it's suffering, we want to evade, right? That's why there are people who are so smart, they are so successful, but yet they fall into their own traps. They rise the ranks, the corporate ranks, the corporate ladder. They're so smart, they can eliminate competitions. They can negotiate and win all the time. They rise to the top, and then all it takes is just one woman to walk into their life and just destroy everything they have, right? Or they make a lot of money and then they evade taxes, thinking they can get away, they can outsmart the laws. So their own delusion. In other words, without seeing things properly and without removing the egoistic attachment, we fall into our own traps. And insight allows you to see the traps and to avoid the traps. Does it make sense? And that's the important here, is that when we understand conditionality, we will avoid those traps, because we're not going to do things that would put ourselves in danger. We are not going to become attached to something that's going to be a burden on us. And when we have insight, we see conditionality. When we have certain goals, we will feed that with the proper conditions, meaning our motivation, the proper skillful deeds, and the environment to help us to achieve that. And if we don't understand conditionality, we're more likely to take the easy way, the shortcut to get there because of the egoistic motivation to enjoy, to enjoy, to maximize our enjoyment with minimal efforts, right? Okay. Madhyamaka doctrines on sunyata, which is emptiness, and the Yoga Kara teachings on absolute mind, right? So this is the emphasis. Madhyamaka talks about sunyata, which is emptiness or voidness, and then Yoga Kara emphasizes on the absolute mind, and then Avatamsaka in the middle talks about mutual interpenetration, meaning that there is no obstruction. You can overcome your obstruction because there you recognize the influence, but you don't become enslaved to that influence. Meaning that I know that you're influencing me, but at the same time I have my own individuality, not in an egoistic sense that I have my own individuality, but I know, you know who you are and you know what you want. That's individuality, and you're not being distracted to regress from your progress. Does it make sense so far? Any comments? Okay, the tantric systems of correspondences and the tantric practice of sacramental actions or spiritual actions, within which are included Yogacara meditations and Madhyamaka wisdom, are links in the chain whereby tantric Buddhism is indissolubly connected within the body of the Mahayana teachings. So you can now, what's saying here, there is connection, even though tantric Buddhism came into existence 1,000 years later, after the Buddha had entered nirvana. But he's trying to say that it is within Buddhism, and that the connection is with Madhyamaka wisdom and Yogacara meditation. This being so, it is a serious blunder to represent Tantra as a corruption or degeneration of Buddhism, because people would say, look at the monks who wear their outfits and they have their tools, they have their, the Dharma instrument, and say the Buddha never used those things. So this got to be, some mysterious form of Buddhism, not the original Buddhism. So that's an interpretation or misunderstanding of Tantric Buddhism. So Tantra differs from earlier schools only in emphasizing the practical rather than the theoretical aspect of the Dharma. So does it make sense here? That when we see something, that we shouldn't just judge, but we should understand that Tantric it looks different because of the practical side of it and not the theoretical side of the doctrine, right? So unless one can recognize this fact, all our efforts to understand that Tantra will be in vain. So, and we're going to dive deep into that, but I probably won't be able to finish this. I'll pick up next time, but we'll cover as much as we can into the Tantric text teachers in the schools to understand a little bit more. But it is very important for us, again, to recognize that Tantric Buddhism is about practice and not theory, right? Okay. Actually, what's follow is much more interesting because it deals into the dangers and the misunderstanding and the difficulties. It is more difficult to give a general account of Tantra than any other Buddhist schools. And for example, with other Buddhist schools, you can philosophize and you would not be very far off wrong. But with Tantric, if you generalize it, it's likely you're going to be wrong. And that's the reason why it's so difficult just to study Tantric Buddhism on your own. Tantra, being concerned not with the theoretical generalizations, but with the details of practice, was, and to a great extent still is, not exoteric, but esoteric, right? Now, Sankarsita is going to the reasons why Tantric Buddhism existed. Why did it come into existence 1,000 years later? And here he's saying that Tantra is not for exoteric audience, not for the general public, but it's really for a private esoteric teaching, transmission. For centuries preserved exclusively by means of oral traditions and carefully shielded from profane curiosity. 世俗, right? Profane, it's just a mundane word. When people look into it and they'll be curious and they'll make judgment very quickly. Just like nowadays, people read headlines. They don't read the whole article. And in order to capture your attention, they would have this headline, very provocative headline, just for you to read, and you think you understand the whole article, but there are details in there that may have nothing to do with the title. But nowadays, because we're so busy, right? We just read titles, headlines, without reading through the entire articles. So here he's saying that we should. That is why it's being transmitted orally and privately. It's because there needs to be a direct teaching in order to avoid misunderstanding. And that's only for a small group. You can't broadcast. Broadcast is for the general audience, general public, right? But you have if you have mentorship, it's on a one-on-one basis, right? Where in the mentorship, the mentor the mentee will consult the mentor on specific things, and so that's for a more exclusive. And so that's why Tantra is more esoteric as opposed to exoteric, more private. And that is because they are based on theory. They're based on practice. Just like when you sit in meditation, when you want to practice, you go step by step. You can't generalize it. It has to be specific step by step. So materials for writing the history of an esoteric movement will be very scanty, and if not entirely non-existent. So the fact that the tantras and their supplementary texts are largely unexplored in the modern times and even isolated in different fragments, and generally accessible, but it's there are a lot that have not been explored. But even if the texts that are being publicly available, it's often it's in the language of the tantras, meaning that a lot of it is very symbolical, and whatever that you may read, you could misunderstand it if you don't know whether it's historical or symbolic. And especially in the absence of oral tradition, meaning nobody there beside you to explain to you the meaning behind it, if under your own interpretation, you're likely to misrepresent it, right? Lama Govinda, I think Govinda was a German Buddhist. He made a lot of translations, very helpful. He said that there are a lot of biographies of tantric teachers with a lot of incidents, but they must be interpreted not literally but symbolically, and without the necessary key to the understanding in a certain highly esoteric form of yoga, right? Very private, seclusive form of yoga. It is impossible to be sure, well, which order of reality one is dealing with. Is it historical or metaphysical or spiritual? Right? Tantra is again concerned not with the theory but with practice. Again, he's re-emphasizing that. So for okay. So that's why the spiritual teachers are called Acharayas. That's a name for spiritual teachers. And and they are the most regarded as they are very well regarded as treasures in the school of study. Um, so, so but they also claim that tantras profess to be the word of the Lord of the Buddha himself, and so they also claim that tantras or mantras also came from the Buddha. And he said that before we dismiss this claim as fake, right? Two facts must be taken into consideration. One is that is in connection with the questions of relative authenticity, meaning that Hinayana, they claim themselves to be authentic because they transmitted, they wrote down very early on after Buddha had entered nirvana. And then Mahayana text was about 500 years later or 600 years later. But Tantra was about 1,000 years later, almost 1,000 years later, when it started to write down into text. But he said that the second thing that we should consider is that in the Indian traditions, it was normal for people to transmit things orally. There were no written contracts like we do today. If you make commitment, people remember, and there was no need for writing, because their memory, their retentive memory was amazing. And they said that having been transmitted orally for 500 years or even 1,000 years, it was normal, right? Indian memories were extraordinarily retentive and quite capable of preserving for 100 generations teachings. Right, tantric teachings were not committed to writing until 1,000 years after the parinirvana. I mean, the Buddha had entered nirvana, passed on from this world. So, in the second fact is that we said that those who have experiment in studying meditation, for example, it's difficult to practice successfully in any form of meditation simply by following directions. We can. In other words, you can't just pick up a book and practice meditation. It's much easier to practice with the teachers because they can see, like, they look at your posture and they know that you have the wrong posture, or when you sit incorrectly, they know that it's incorrect. They can remind you. But if you read on your own, then you don't know what you're doing is wrong or right, right? So the written instructions seem to have been intended not as a guide to novices, but an memoir to initiate pupils. So in other words, those written instructions were for those who already have experience, and it's just reminders. But for beginners, we shouldn't just pick up a book on meditation and practice on our own, but we should practice with a guru or teachers. So that now that the further we go back in the history of Buddhist literature, the scantier do these written or recorded instructions become, meaning less and less. But now that more that we are near towards the modern time, we see more books, right, written on Buddhism. But during the Buddhist day, there were no writings. But the further that we're moving away from the Buddha's time, right, 2,500 years ago, the further that we are closer to the current time, we see there are more books written on Buddhism. But also that he said that strangely, Theravada, the Pali Canon, and the Mahayana Sutras are silent with regard to the method. It's talking about philosophy, about doctrines, about theories, but nothing much about the practice. But we know that the Buddha himself was in the habit of instructing his disciples, often questioning them from time to time of their progress. So he was giving instructions to his disciples, but those instructions were not written down. It was only about a theory, right? For example, in the Dhammapada, I've extracted a couple examples in the Dhammapada. the monk would obtain, from the teacher, the Buddha, a meditation topic, and they would able to go into the forest and practice, following the instructions. And if they couldn't achieve the goal, meaning they couldn't achieve arhatship, they couldn't become a sage, they were not successful, they would go back to the Buddha and ask for further instructions, and the Buddha would give them specific instructions. Oh, you didn't do this wrong, you need to do this, do that. Right? So those specific instructions, somehow they were not written down. But we know that the Buddha gave the disciples, his disciples, instructions of how to practice Buddhism. Does it make sense? And then there's so many stories, and there's another one. Same thing, monks, right, a group of monks, they would receive the meditation topic from the Buddha, and they would go into the forest to practice. If on their way, if they see somebody who was interested in learning Buddhism, those monks would guide them too. For example, in this case, there were Matikamata, mother of the village, offered the monks food and asked for instructions. And she asked for the instructions on the practice of meditation. And the monks taught her how to meditate on the 32 constituents of the body, leading to the awareness of the decay of the body. Right? So we know that the disciples of the Buddha gave instructions, but those instructions were not written down. Only the theories, the principles were written down. And so unless we are to suppose that all those instructions are lost, in which case it would be difficult to explain the astounding spiritual vitality of Buddhism. There's a growth of Buddhism throughout the world now, right? We can only assume that there existed side by side with the exoteric and esoteric traditions, whose primary concern was with the correct transmission of the technique of the various forms of meditation, right? So Tantra came about was to make sure that those instructions would not be lost. Does it make sense? Right? And so that's why they say that it came from the Buddha himself. But for us, if we don't study deeply, we see no connection. The Buddha didn't wear those hats, right? Those outfits, didn't use those instruments. So how could you say it's the proper form of Buddhism? But from this explanation, I think we can now appreciate that it came from the Buddha's golden mouth. That those specific, again, Tantric Buddhism was not to capture the theory, but to capture the instructions, the specific instructions of how to achieve. And with those instructions, you can't just generalize. You can't just broadcast to the public audience, because they're not specific. And so that's why they had to transmit in a very small private group, right? Teacher to student in a small group. And that's why it is called esoteric, mi zong, mak dang. Mi or esoteric is secretive in the sense that on a mentorship basis, one-on-one, not because it's secretive like a code. Does it make sense? So secretive in a sense that I can only give you specific directions by observing how you practice and your questions to me, so I can give you guidance, specific guidance. And that's why it is esoteric, not as opposed to the general public, like the generalizations of the Buddhist principles, right? So this tradition, though not incorporated into the canonical text, the sutras, gradually infiltrated into the commentarial and expository literature. Both Pali and Sanskrit, and in the end became comparatively public in Tantras. So perhaps those were originally commentaries about the instructions, and then they formalized those instructions and made into Tantras. Okay, we will go into, we're kind of running out of time. We will pick up more details. I think this is a little bit more. This should be more interesting than what we have discovered. We discuss, so we can pick up this next time. Are there any comments before we end? Yeah.
Okay, I already mentioned as how can I get a wellness, which is the empty, and how can I become egolessness?
Okay.
So forget myself. So egolessness is the in the life, be forget and quit the self desire and outside environment desire. Try to, like you said, practice the meditation every day. So so that means I get you said early. You say you get the attitude of wellness, and forget myself. It'll be next.
So the question is, how do you, how would one practice egolessness, right?
Yes, egoless is the kind of wellness.
Wellness?
Yeah, wellness. How to say VOID?
Oh, voidness. Okay. How do you practice egolessness and voidness?
The very important thing is that forget a whole desire for myself or outside environment. Desire.
Well, okay, for example, you have yourself in a situation, you're stuck in a desert, right? And there's no food around, and then you look inside, there's a loaf of bread, can only feed one person. So, and you study Buddhism about selflessness. So who do you give this piece of bread to? Do you feed yourself or you feed the other person? Huh? Well, you can't. Let's say you cannot. It's only enough. You can share, but then you can split, but then that will not be enough, and you might both die. So how do we practice egolessness? Well, if you say, I forget myself, I'm going to give others, that's not egolessness, because there's still attachment to others, right? But you say, oh, I'm going to give myself, then that's egoistic attachment. So it's still attachment. So what should you do? So how? But if you split the two, then you're both gonna die because there's not gonna be enough food. Let's say that there's not enough food for you to make to the end of the journey, and then you receive more food. You get into a village, there'll be plenty of food. But in the meantime, if you split up the food, there won't be any food for you or that person to get to the village. So how do you practice egolessness in this case? Forget about food. Nobody eats. Well, then you're denying. So the point here about egolessness is, whoever can bring benefits to by surviving to other people, we should give the food to. If you are more capable than the other person, then you shouldn't deny your ability to help, right? Because by denying, that's egoistic too, as well as by attaching to it. Being arrogant or being humble are both forms of egoism, right? I'm humble, I'm less than you, I bow down to you. I see that I am being below you. That's egoistic, because I still see myself being below you. I'm proud of being humble, right? Of all the people in this world, I am the most humble person, right? That's egoistic as well. So egolessness, how I understand it, is that whoever can do the best job, we should promote that person. We should allow that person to do the best. If that person is better than us, has more affinity with helping other people, we should allow that person that piece of bread and do the sacrifice.
Alone, then that piece of bread would also make me egoistic, because I'm acknowledging the fact that I'm below him.
Yeah, it could be. But in this sense that we, in a true Bodhisattva sense, there is no self, there's no other. Whoever can do the best job, we should let that person do it. Right? And doesn't mean that, hey, I'm studying, I'm compassionate. That means I should allow other people to step on me. That's not what being compassionate is. Right? Compassionate is that you help people with the intention of them being better, not to enable them to become more needy. Right? You give a person or your children or your friends money, not that they become more dependent on you, but you want them to be self-empowered, right? So that's egolessness, is to think about other people, but also reflect what you can do. If you have ability to help, you should help, and otherwise you just do it yourself. if it's more efficient, better that you do the work, you just go and do it. Don't beat around the bushes and try to delay. But in certain situations, we should train and help other people. But in a dire situation where immediate action is needed, you gotta do it yourself. Like in a burning building, by saving people in that burning building, you become a hero. But you say, oh, I don't want to become a hero. I don't want a public recognition. I'm going to train somebody. There's no time for that. The building is burning. Somebody is going to die. You don't take action. So you just have to do it. That's egolessness. That voidness. No. My understanding of voidness is the ability to change. There's nothing that permanently exists. It's the ability to change. It's the possibilities of change. That principle is voidness. Because if it's not voidness, it's stuck. Without space, you cannot build a new building. This building will exist forever and it will all decay. Nobody can use it. But if there's no space, you cannot knock down this building to build something more beautiful. Right? So voidness is, you can go either way, up or down, beautiful or ugly, depending how you want the condition you put in it. That's a voidness. That is so powerful because it allows you to change for the better. Because without voidness, we cannot become better. We are stuck. Without possibility of change, we are stuck. Yeah. Forget about the terms. Think about possibility of change. Forget about voidness. I'm just throwing out terms there to communicate, but we should not get stuck on terminology. Think of it as ability to change. Conditionality is ability to change. Right? All right. Appreciate the comment. Let's wrap this up with merit dedication. If you could please join your palms together, we recite. May the merits and virtues accrue today adorn the Buddha Pure Lands, repay 4 types of kindness above, and aid those suffering in the paths below. May those who see and hear of this bring forth the resolve for the Bodhi mind. When this retribution body is complete, together we shall meet in the land of ultimate bliss. If you could please rise, we bow to the Buddha 3 times to show our respect. First bow, second bow, and third bow. Ami Tofo.